Thank you very much, Hassanel. We do apologize. We meant to have two other representatives that are were part of this incredible phenomenon of encampments on campuses all around the world in solidarity with the Palestine struggle in general and with the people of Gaza in particular. Encampments and in several places were even able to pressure universities to rethink investments in Israeli companies, rethink official connections, institutional connections with Israeli universities, and so on. By sheer unexpected turn of events, we lost in the last minute. I mean, not they're still there. We lost them. We just lost them for the webinar. They're still alive and kicking somewhere else. Two other people that would have kind of diversified for us the discussion. On the other hand, since I will open and Arij, I will introduce Arij in a moment, will follow. It gives, because it's a small group, it gives chance to many of you to, to say a bit more than usual, not just a question. Help us to think about this issue strategically and hopefully this more intimate kind of forum that was in a way imposed a little bit on us would also produce something very positive in the end of the day. And I hope that after Arij, Dr. Chandra would be willing to say a few things as well, so that to get us into the debate itself. Let me first say something about Arij, and then I will give you my peace of mind on what we are discussing, and then Arij can take it from there. Arij Jaffrey is a Palestinian PhD student in the University of Exeter in the Palestine Studies program. Arij is about to complete, I'm sure successfully, a doctorate dissertation, an amazing doctorate dissertation that looks at the way refugees engage, imagine, converse, and talk about solutions for the liberation of Palestine. So this is not just a dissertation that looks at their wish for return, which quite a lot of works have already been done, looking how sacred and how profound the right of return is for Palestinian refugees. This engages with the Palestinian refugees, giving them an authentic voice about not just return, but the future of a decolonized Palestine. The one-state solution, the two-state solution, the kinds of aspirations and hopes for a liberated, decolonized Palestine among refugees. And it is not a secret that their voices, if we do reach this hopeful moment in history, will be very, very important in defining the future of a decolonized, a de-Zionized Palestine, and therefore this is a highly important dissertation that hopefully would be with us in complete form very soon. Arij is also a leading activist on the campus at our university, Exeter University. For those who don't know, Exeter is in Devon, in southwest Britain. The University of Exeter is one of the Russell Group universities in Britain, which are the leading 15 universities in the United Kingdom. And the students in Exeter, like in so many other campuses around the world, build an encampment after the 7th of October, wishing to pressure the university to examine its institutional connections with Israeli universities, with companies that produce weapons, securitization services, and so on. This is quite an important enterprise or project since university managements are very unhappy usually for such forms of protests. And as we know, in some places like in the United States, university managements involved local police that evicted brutally and by force these kinds of encampments. But there's very little doubt that this movement of encampments, which is globally, you can find it everywhere. In fact, we were supposed to have, and hopefully we will have another webinar on this, we were supposed to have people who were involved in encampments, maybe in more unlikely places, such as South Korea and Japan. This movement has galvanized many other people beyond the student community and the faculties, and gave a special impetus to the nature of the solidarity movement with the Palestinians in general and with those in Gaza in particular, given the fact that both governments and mainstream media, and to a certain extent mainstream academia, were showing self-censorship and restraint in condemning Israel, in using the appropriate language to describe what's happening on the ground in Gaza, and even went further than that, persecuting anyone who was not loyal to the Israeli narrative of the origins of the 7th of October, or the Israeli explanation or propaganda in defining their acts in the Gaza Strip as self-defense. And this is why, if you look at the activities in the encampments, apart from being an act of protest, like a demonstration and so on, it was also a space of learning, of teaching, of disseminating knowledge, and discussing jointly history, the current realities, the strategies. This was a very important message, even to people who are now in the most horrific conditions, the people in Gaza. It's a message: we see you, we hear you, we know where you are, and we know what you are experiencing. We may not have the power to help you directly, but we are engaged 24/7 with doing that, with the hope that at one moment our actions and energy and efforts would be translated into an action that would also change the reality in which you are living now. So I think that was very, very important. There's something else I would like to say about the encampments, which I think has to be realized. Two more things, actually. One is that, in particular in the United States, although I do think it is also true about encampments elsewhere, but in particular in the United States, if you look at the universities which were the main venues for the encampments, and you understand the American system, for good or for worse, because we may have, our criticism of capitalism and American liberalism, but for good or for worse, these are the places from which hopefully the next generation of American politicians, businessmen, leaders of the society would emerge. These are the elite universities, the Ivy League universities, and so on. And there's some hope there that in this group that would be the core group, as we call it in social sciences, the core group that would produce the next, hopefully, some of the next policymakers that could have, who might have influence on the reality in Israel and Palestine, that they would come to this moment in their life, in their careers, in their new position, by being molded at that moment of galvanization in the encampments. This is highly important, to look at the movement of the encampments as a long-term movement, that even if physically, I don't know, and we can discuss also with Arij there, if she thinks too, if the encampments would kind of reappear in the beginning of the next academic year, God forbid, the genocide will continue with the same intensity that it does today. But even if it doesn't, if a new form of protest, people are thinking out of the box all the time to find ways of making them heard and put pressure on their institutions. This is going to have a long-term effect on the solidarity movement with the Palestinians, because it highlights the fact that so many important sections of civil society in different parts of the world do not share the government's policies and attitudes towards Israel and Palestine. And the students may be the vanguard of this kind of protests against government policies, but I think that they represent a much wider phenomenon, an intersectional alliance in society that sees the policies of Palestine as being, as epitomizing other policies which the society find unacceptable by their own governments. This could be ecological policies, economic policies, social policies. And you could see, and I was fortunate enough to visit at least 4 camps in the United States. And it was very clear to me that there an intersection between people who already were involved as students in other movements against global warming, against economic inequality in society, social inequality in society, against the hypocrisy of the global north in the way it deals with the problems and agendas of the global south. This was not just an encampment that dealt with Palestine, but these were encampments, those at least I visited, that wanted to make sure that students take upon themselves an assignment which is beyond the temporality of the temporal moment of the encampment itself, as a kind of a message for life. So that's the first point. And the last point I want to make before I move to Arid is that there is another dimension to life in university that sometimes is not properly unveiled in the public domain. And this is the fact that the universities themselves are beginning to produce knowledge, for the lack of a better way of putting it, are producing knowledge about Palestine that is very different from the one that was produced in the past. And when I say that the university produces knowledge, I mean, I'm talking about what is being taught in courses, or as we call them in England, modules, the kinds of things that are being discussed by workshops, the kinds of topics that people choose for their academic articles, even if these academic articles have to go through a very pedantic process of refereeing, and nonetheless, people take the risk of making sure that this is not just an article that would be accepted by a good journal, but this would be an article that also reflects the moral views and the standing on a certain issue, especially on Palestine. This is a much quieter revolution that has happened in the last 10 years. And the more I'm looking into it, the more I'm impressed by its size, by its spectrum, and by its depth. And I'm saying this because I think that in the encampments and outside the encampments, in my connection with the space where academics, whether they're students, graduate students, undergraduates, or faculty, that when I met in so many other places in the world, including in Latin America, and in a more distant visit to Malaysia and so on, students and faculty that are engaged professionally with Palestine are now gelling into a huge group that could be defined as human capital. There's a huge human capital, Palestinian and pro-Palestinian, of very qualified, professional, young scholars in different disciplines that unfortunately, because of politics, the Palestinian national movement is not properly using them. It's not properly assisting itself with their knowledge, energy, and commitment. And if there will be a way to integrate this, what I call human capital, into the liberation movement, it will give it a way of dealing as an antidote with the factionalism, with a lack of vision, with the collaborationist tendencies of some of its sections. It will liberate it from all these illnesses and would help it to become the liberation movement that has a clear vision of the future, has a consensual way, and probably will be also able to build a new structure that is representative and democratic of the liberation movement. Because as I recently tried to convince people in several articles that to my surprise became quite popular, I think that the project of Zionism is coming to an end, and it is collapsing in front of our eyes. And I'm now physically in the belly of the beast, and I can see the disintegration even more profoundly, and I'm even more convinced after coming back and looking at it from the inside. The disintegration is accelerating, actually, is accelerating. But if there is no powerful liberation movement to take its place, it can create chaos for a very long period. Uh, and I have a lot of faith from everything that the encampments represented in terms of a new Palestinian generation taking over the lead and telling us not just what is their vision in terms of liberation of Palestine, but also telling us more practical things about the future, which we should not be delayed too late in the day, because I do think these historical processes I'm talking about are unfolding in front of our eyes. And this questions like, what is our idea of the Jewish collective in the liberated Palestine? Definitely, a Zionist definition of Jewish collectivity is not possible in a free Palestine. But what is then? Is there a collective? Is there respect for a collective identity? One question. Second question, how do we differentiate, if we do differentiate, between Jewish settlements that were built in the West Bank and the Jewish settlements that were built on the appropriated land in the Galilee and in the Nakab? I mean, these seems to be kind of late in the day question that nobody should deal with them now. But that's exactly where a committed academic, or what Gramsci used to call organic intellectuals, have to be involved in, apart from being part of the activism that wants to get to more immediate results given the genocidal policies on the ground. So I think this is a ray of hope, not just in terms of what's happening on the ground, which is a lot to do with the disintegration of Israel, but a ray of hope for a different kind of a liberation movement that would have the ability to be united, consensual, representative, and powerful in changing the reality. So I will stop here, and I will ask first Arij and then Dr. Chandra, and then we'll open it up for comments. Thank you. Arij, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilan. It's always wonderful. Yeah, and it's also wonderful to hear you. Such a great way of words, Ilan. But I'm very grateful to be here with you. And it's really rare to get to talk with different audiences. Most of the time, we're very much focused in talking to the Western audience in the East. But anyway, I've prepared a little bit of kind of my own reflections on what has been going on in the solidarity through the encampment, but also prior to the encampment and what I've been also doing in the past. But I mean, in the case of Exeter, where right now I'm based, I mean, our student movement really emerged, as many other universities, right immediately after the initial waves of the first bombing campaigns, no? And the students of Columbia have set up the first encampment, which really sparked a wave of encampment globally. And as Ilan said, you know, it brought the student movement in support of Palestine and Gaza, particularly in the face of the ongoing genocide, to the world's attention, and directly confronting the university as an institution of complicity. Today's generation of students like myself, and maybe there's a couple of people also on the call, we face multiple layers of oppression, and they're very, very complex, like including climate change, economic, power and gender inequality, poverty, racism, and hunger. And in this essence, our activism as student movement on Palestine, in terms of its content, is really part of more of a global intersectional struggle, as Ilan alluded. But this new generation of activists are learning, and again, as part of the movement in solidarity with Palestine, the repressive nature of the university institution, and to some extent as the state, no, when challenged. And the students need to question their own institutions, explore the change that can be brought as part of their interaction with these institutions, as they are part of most creative, motivated, and inspired generation at the beginning of their lives. Here in Exeter, actually, we have been protesting since the second week of the genocide, and initially driven by the outrage against our university's silence. They weren't really saying anything, especially given that we have a whole center dedicated to Palestine studies. But this kind of protest really expanded to highlight the university's corporate role in supporting and upholding Israel's system of oppression, specifically focusing on their partnerships with universities that are directly complicit in the oppression of Palestinians, but also in partnerships with companies that provide in arms to Israel. But as the global movement, as an important aspect of our experience in Exeter, it has been the intersectionality involving people of different religious, political, economic, racial, and gender backgrounds. And this diversity is really a strength for us, and it has served as an essential element in building the spirit of the solidarity, especially in a predominantly white, rich student population like in Exeter, just as Ilan was alluded with the case of the Ivy League. It's the elite of the elite of the community. And part of the community that we have built have drawn to our movement. They did so because of either their ethnicity or their gender identity or their color, but also significantly of their social class, where they want to challenge. In terms of our demands, what we are been asking, what we're asking today is really similar in so many ways to demands that put forward to universities in the past through different student movements. For instance, I was reading the other day about protests in Essex universities in the 80s, and the students were demanding to have an anti-racism officer. They were asking to have scholarship for students coming from the African National Congress. And they were actually also demanding support for Palestinian students in the aftermath of the Beirut invasion, but also at the beginning of the First Intifada. So more broadly, student activism for divestment also, we know it was at the heart of the struggle in the universities in support of the ending the apartheid in South Africa. As it's the case now, ending and demanding the end of apartheid, occupation, and settler colonialism in Palestine. But today also what we're asking our universities are to review their courses so they can include Palestinian perspectives, as Ilan was also saying. But also we're asking them to support rebuilding the educational system in Palestine. We're asking them to provide scholarship for Palestinians. But more importantly, and interestingly for the student movement, is to demand the discontinuation of the university's complicity with Israel by ending their partnership with and divestment from companies that really support the settler colonial projects and the persecution of the genocide in Gaza, as well as the repression of all Palestinians across historical Palestine. The responses from universities to these solidarity action on campuses really have varied across the university community. As Ilan also said, most of university administrators want to ignore and continue to business as usual. They want to hide behind the greenwashing and public statement of socially progressive principles. They refuse to consider their own complicity in the genocide in Gaza, while students are really demanding transparency by disclosures, accountability, and direct action, such as cutting ties with the armed companies that provide weapons to Israel, where they kind of directly conduct these genocide in Gaza, but also the repression system in the West Bank and historical Palestine, but also direct action in cutting ties with Israeli universities that also a core pillar of the Israeli repression system against Palestinians. Well, students are also right now, especially for example, that Ilan was saying, they use a lot of their imaginatory power to envisage and create an inclusive, participatory, and safe spaces within university, like a kind of alternative parallel university world, kind of reflecting the kind of the society that we aspire to build as students. But also, again, I mean, faculty and professors, they contribute to these alternative spaces. They provide education in a more free, equal way. They promote skills sharing, popular education that actually, in a lot of time, is inspired by Palestinian resistance and the fight for liberation. In a way, they're challenging the traditional academic boundaries. But university historically and currently has responded to this kind of activism with force, calling the police at the slightest sign of disruption. They call it disruption, which reveals how the universities are not really a place of neutral grounds for growth, education, innovation, but more of a places where corporate and state interests are really protected by repression and institutional control. Here in Exeter, as much as in the rest of the UK and globally, the UK have been called multiple times against peaceful protesters, and students have been threatened with disciplinary actions. Intimidation has been used as a tactic along the way, which kind of demonstrate the university's preferences for repression over constructive engagement around Palestine and questioning their own complicity in the genocide. But this movement will continue and must also broaden. It has to include different groups advocating for social justice issues. And the movement is really determined to continue these advocacy and kind of hold academic and political institutions accountable to the values and the principles that profess to hold. And if we see that this university, they claim that they want to build a social just future, just as exactly what the University of Exeter write in their vision, they must include Palestinians, but also other groups, Uyghur groups, communities. They need to think about social justice advocates in their vision. And I think a lot of the students do see one way to change, to have a real change, is actually to continue this resistance within the universities and to build these coalitions with academic and professors that they have on campus. But what we also can see that the Palestinian solidarity movement has really changed over the past decades. For example, in the Second Intifada, many of the solidarity activities really were focused on education, raising awareness about the Palestinian cause. My direct involvement have really began at a community level during the mid-2000s. And I have been participating in a lot of campaigns where doing education, raising awareness, but there were also some attempts on peace building and coexistence between Palestinian and Israelis. Today, this has changed. I mean, there's a stronger focus today on centering Palestine and the Palestinians in the conversation. There's a lot about changing the narrative. There's a lot about imagining a future where equality, justice, liberation, freedom can be the ultimate goals, rather than on focusing on building bridges between different communities, like, for example, between Palestinians and Israelis. And today also we can see that the movement is more action-oriented. The movement is willing to call out institutions within the framework of actions in solidarity with Palestine, including student bodies and universities, for literally their racism, their structural inequality. Like, for example, in the case of Exeter, in the first statements they put out, they would not even say the word Palestine or Palestinians. But in order for us to broaden this movement, we need to kind of continue building coalition. We need to sensitize students from different backgrounds and from different contexts. And it's always crucial to kind of give voices and hear directly stories from Palestinians and hear their own vision for a better future. And Elon also have said that the student movement really has galvanized and re-energized solidarity movement around Palestine, really everywhere, which we have been seeing before the Gaza genocide, that the solidarity movement had been stagnant for a number of years under the hegemony of the Israeli and the Western governments narrative of what they call the conflict, no? And we've seen also how the Abraham Baths have really used as a weapon on kind of quieting a lot of the regional solidarity among the Arab countries. But the solidarity movement as itself right now is very much local, very much decentralized, but also it's uncoordinated. And in many ways, actually, that reflects the disunity and the lack of strong national and clear project in Palestine. And the revitalization, however, has really energized solidarity literally everywhere and at multiple levels, from local communities to churches to elite, as well as minor university we've seen elsewhere, to massive popular expression of support in the global south. And the vocal active support that we see from countries like South Africa or to Brazil, Spain, and their actions at the international institutions such as the ICJ is a very important development and a good support for this movement. Another opportunity brought about by the current situation is the possibility to build stronger relationships of solidarity with the global south. And the focus has been primarily on countries of the West, unfortunately, given the role of the West that West plays in supporting the settler colonial state. But the global South is playing an increasingly important role, and there's a lot of popular support for the Palestinian cause in the global South that we need to capitalize on. We also need to think about the importance of the vitality and the extensive nature of the student protests in these activist students from all walks of life and presenting diversity of society are but the vanguard, as Ilan used, of much of the broader change of attitude of the young people in the West countries, but also globally toward more fundamental unjust nature of Israeli occupation and settler colonialism, as well as their treatment of the Palestinian people. And this represents a generational change in countries such as the United States. But if we want to talk about specifically, like Ilan wanted to hear a little bit of more of successes about some of the encampment, and in this case of Exeter, I think one important thing to highlight is we could held a space of dialogue with the university. However, this dialogue was never easy. It's very difficult. A lot of time is patronizing. A lot of time is very dismissive. A lot of time is intimidatory. But we managed to push back because what we have done as students, we went prepared. We did our homework. We did our research about how the university is complicit with the very little information that is available. But we pushed them to come back in more meetings, more prepared to answer questions because they knew that they're coming in a meeting where they basically going to be grilled by a student body. A second thing which we have already talked about is the space, that we held, is that kind of multicultural space between students as well as faculty. What we have got so far from the University of Exeter is that they promised that we will have working groups, 2 working groups. One is to talk about how we can develop some regulation for their investments to ensure that they can have a clauses of human rights, ensuring that the university will not do any kind of investment in companies that violates human rights. Now, University of Exeter has been having a very ethical kind of more or less policy about their investments, but not necessarily developed with kind of a human right lens. And they're willing to work with us on that, but they also have never actually invested in weapon companies directly. So that's why they're actually willing to do that, which is still a success in itself. And another group that they're willing to work with us is ensuring that we can build supporting the education system in Palestine and in Gaza particularly, and also providing scholarship for Palestinian students or pathways for, Palestinian students from Gaza particularly to kind of pursue their own education in the UK, but also in the University of Exeter. Now, one of the biggest sticking point in the conversation with the University of Exeter is partnership. The University of Exeter partnership was adamant and still adamant till today to refuse to open the conversation about their partnerships with companies that are directly providing weapons to the Israeli state, companies that have been legally convicted in different forms. But the university kind of rejects that they have that kind of partnerships that directly link to the genocide, because they consider that the partnerships with these companies, there is an outcome of improving research. But every single time they come back to us with a different reasoning why they do not want to engage in the conversation about the partnership. Some kind of silly reasoning, for example, like, oh, these companies are part of the company that provides security and safety for the UK citizens, which is kind of insane to think about. It's not about human rights, it's not about international law. It's about only providing security for the UK citizens, but at the same time, it's okay for them that they can contribute to the genocide of other people. So it kind of puts the contradiction of the values of the institution itself at the heart of the conversation. But as Elon was saying, whether next year is going to be a different encampment or a different new forms, one thing that I'm 100% sure, and part of the community that we built, is that we are determined to continue, whether it was through an encampment, whether it was through different lobbying, whether it's through different kind of protests at campus, that we will continue to have that kind of pressure to lobby and advocate for Palestinian rights, but also advocate to have campuses that are free of military research. And I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arij. So you raised so many issues. I have some good news. One of the person we thought would not show did show. So we'll postpone Dr. Chandra to maybe a bit later, or maybe after even some people comments, and Dr. Chandra, you can sum up for us the whole event, if that's okay with you. So we are improvising a little bit under the circumstances. We have Damien Richards, who is part of the encampment in Bristol. And I don't know, Damien, are you ready to jump in? Where is he? Oh, there he is. Were you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Can you, we're a bit kind of rushing around, but in 10 to 15 minutes, tell us about the encampment in Bristol, your overall understanding of the encampment movement in general, and what we are really, really keen to know, what do you think can be done in the future? I mean, obviously we are entering this summer vacation, but another academic year is awaiting us in September, and the genocide doesn't seem to end. So we would love to hear your thoughts about these issues. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry for being late. I'm having to do this
no worries,
at work, so I've had to negotiate some time to come and do this. So yeah, what do I want to talk about first? Yeah, so the encampments have been very, for me at least, as someone who's quite young, they seem quite a new thing, I suppose. And it's quite a breath of fresh air in the sort of activists movements, I suppose, especially around Palestine. It's so much more massive, I think, than anything I've experienced before. And that's, I think, really emboldened people to go further than they've gone before, which I think is really good. So specifically in terms of what they've I guess I'll talk about a bit about the encampments, and then what I think they've achieved and what I think they've done well, how I think they've affected the universities, and then probably some issues that we're facing now that I think really affect the future, maybe. So in terms of our effect on the university, they've been, I think, there's been quite a different results at different universities. Some universities seem to have sort of caved into pressure a bit more, but at the University of Bristol, it's not been the case, and we've had exactly no discussion with the actual university at all. They've basically not negotiated with us at all. And recently they issued a possession order, meaning the encampment had to decamp. But we decamped before that went to court, and then the court have dropped it, meaning that there isn't actually a possession order on the land, which might end up being more useful. But I think that's just sort of exemplifies what their response is. Like, they don't actually care about negotiating with us in any way. Any kind of show of like student democracy and what we actually want. Like, a load of people coming to this encampment. We had an open letter with hundreds of signatures. Sort of a lot of stuff that we thought would give us a bit more credibility, I suppose. But the university just dismissed that totally and say that if it's not gone through their student union, which they basically control, then it doesn't count as democracy, basically. Because the student union are democratically elected. So they'll find any way they can of just sort of avoiding responding to us. That has led to the tactics being more of sort of disruption and trying to sort of damage the reputation of the university. And what we found during that is a lot of people we talk to, even now, like for example, we had an open day a few weeks ago and we disrupted pretty much everything they were doing there. And we managed to tell pretty much every single person at that open day sort of a short speech on university and its complicity and how this relates to Palestine. And most people there were seen very surprised. So I think the sort of propaganda that's coming from universities in recent decades, trying to paint their image as something that's sort of progressive and I suppose like, you know, completely good for the world. And there's like, you know, they call themselves a charity, at least Bristol do, like this kind of language. And this seems to have been very successful because normal people talking to just don't really, are very shocked and surprised when they hear about the complicity this university is in. And Bristol's particularly bad, with over £90 million, according to demilitarized education, in research partnerships, and we have no idea how much they have in investments. But people are very surprised by that. But despite that, clearly people are listening to us when we're disrupting these events. Like, we have a lot of negative feedback from certain people, but most people are actually engaging with us and listening to us. And I think that's one of the successes of the movement is actually challenging this propaganda from the universities. That I think it's challenging it in a way that's maybe stronger than has been before, at least in the last couple of decades, at least that I know about. And I think that is even, like, for me, I think that's better as well, because it's not just challenging the university sort of propaganda and the university's image, but when you start thinking critically about the university and the image they're painting, then that is sort of like you're pulling a thread of this ball of threads that is actually all the different contradictions you have in society, all the different contradictions under capitalism that arise from the intersection of state and corporate power and the interests they have. And when you start questioning, well, the university isn't doing what it's saying it's doing, then you start questioning all these other things, and it actually is raising people's awareness into a much stronger anti-capitalist way, I guess, rather than the more, at least what I've experienced, more single issue kind of activism and sort of awareness that people have had. So I think, as in terms of sort of almost public facing part of it, what we found is people coming to the university are able to engage with us a lot more and able to think critically about this, about what the university's image is supposed to be, more than really has that I know about. But there's other things that have I think been really good about the encampment, and that is not just about trying to, I suppose, raise awareness of other people, but also ourselves in the encampment. And we might not be able to have had much of a dialogue with the university itself, but we've been able to hold this space, and we were there for 71 days, I think. And it was a really good space for just dialogue amongst staff, students, and anyone from the public, to come in doing teach outs, collective learnings, just a place where you can be and talk like in a radical way, without having to be stigmatized or without having to sort of liquidate what you're saying to suit certain narratives of certain people that are there. Like, it was a totally open place for that. And that led to, I suppose, I think two things happening. Firstly, all the different sort of disparate groups around the sort of that were involved in the Palestine movement around the university. Several different political parties, different sort of anarchist groups, other different sort of groups, some climate groups, like were all very, before the encampment started, were quite divided. There was lots of actions going on, but they were all very separate. There wasn't really any communication between them, and that led to a fair few problems. Whereas as soon as the encampment sort of started, everyone kind of came together and sort of, I guess, for all trying to fight for this cause together has brought everyone together and realized that really our differences are quite minor compared to like what we're trying to do together. And this space to be able to sort of converge and have dialogue with one another, I think has helped a lot of people break out of the normal bubble that they would normally be in. Like a certain group would usually sort of educate itself in a certain way, which would have a certain bubble that would have a certain effect. Or people might be in a certain social circle that has this, that would have a certain political dialogue, I suppose. Whereas being able to come together and actually sort of connect all of those has really raised people's awareness on how you can think critically about this system that perpetuates genocide, how you can think and how you can actually challenge that system in sort of new ways, which I think is really good. But this has not come without challenges. And there's definitely been issues in the space that we're trying to resolve. So it's not just been this perfect amalgamation of different people. And those issues are sort of become more prominent in the summer, or at least have come to light more. Now we're not having to spend all our energy holding this space. And there have been certain things. So, yeah, so I'll start with like there's certain, I don't know how to word this, but feelings of the space being having problems with whiteness and problems with sort of machoism, like for example, maybe like I don't know if it's something we could disrupt, people getting into a very sort of macho, like yeah, let's go disrupt it, without necessarily thinking about how to plan that in the best way or whether it's actually a good idea in certain circumstances, and issues with people from more privileged backgrounds being able to encourage more sort of extreme actions without necessarily people feeling like they're considering people who are less privileged, and like international students or people from poorer backgrounds who might be at higher risk, and as well as just a general process of trying to sort of like deprogram people from just a lifetime of being under this sort of patriarchal, racist, sort of capitalist society that we live in. And that is definitely like, just because we're activists trying to fight for a free Palestine doesn't mean that we're immune to that. So having to reckon with that in ourselves and having to sort of reckon with that is a process that's still ongoing. And we've had issues with and we've had successes with. And so I suppose I have a question to people that's it out on like how have people dealt with, if people have had those issues, how have they been sort of handled? And I think in terms of the future, I don't really know. I think the encampments are not going away. I think in the future, they're definitely gonna, like, even the ones that have decamped for the summer, I think that's probably a temporary affair. But I suppose the question is, I hope in the future the encampments will, I suppose, branch out and link with the communities that they're part of, and they will take more of a role in the movement as well. Because I think we've seen probably a decline, except in London. I think we've probably seen a decline in the marches that happen, and I think that means that the actual sort of, if you're not like involved in the encampment, I think there's less you can actually do, and I think maybe people feel frustrated about that, and hopefully that can be explored in new ways, and that can grow movement. Yeah, not sure how long I've been speaking, but I don't think I really have much more to say. So yeah,
that's good. Thank you, Damien, because we're sort of squeezed a bit with time, and it's a bit of an improvisation. But thank you so much. You raised the issues that I think you didn't repeat issues that Arid had pointed to. So you really gave us a more different angles to the same topics. I'm really thankful for that. I want to ask Dr. Chandra whether he wants to go now, or maybe we'll have a round of questions and you will summarize it, because we haven't. What is your preferred position? Hassanel, can you help us here?
Yeah, and what I would like to do actually is to raise a question. And
Okay,
I'm hoping that young
Great.
participants will be able to provide some insights, apart from your own contribution, which I'm sure is very valuable. Actually, the question is this: it's something which is straightforward. Looking at various other movements at different times in recent history, movements for change. The community that is at the crux of a struggle of this sort, a community which is right there at the vortex, you find that there would have to be some voices from within that protest, that are capable of seeing the injustice of what's happening and basically taking the side of the oppressed, of the marginalized. One of the things which is amazing about the whole Israel-Palestine conflict is this, that in Israel, there's almost unanimous support for the genocide, at least from the reports that we've been reading from within, different from groups outside that have been saying all the right things about the struggle, but within Israel, it's almost unanimous support for the genocide, support for continuing, taking even harsher measures against the Palestinians and so on. Now, this is something that puzzles me, why in Israel, unlike every other movement of this sort, if you take, for instance, by way of comparison, the anti-colonial movement, in almost every instance, you had people in the colonial capitals, individuals of significance, who took the side of the colonized, like in the case of the Netherlands vis-a-vis Indonesia, in the case of Britain vis-a-vis India, and in a few other instances. But here, it's just amazing how there is this almost total unity. And more than that, sort of people, ordinary people, instead of sort of sympathizing what's happening or trying to understand what is happening, asking for even sterner measures against the Palestinians. I'm just wondering whether our two young friends have some insights on this, why this is happening. I can't understand.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. I suggest we'll take some more comments and then you'll both come back to us with your response, which for whatever you want, okay? Arid and Damien. So I will read another question that came in the box from Leila Passah. Thank you, Arid. What efforts are being made among different universities post-encampment and college protests to organize one global event of students? It is important, I think, to keep this momentum of pressure from students active and inspire more and more student universities to increase this powerful expression of advocacy. I also feel the universities from Global South need to be activated too, and some help get the mainstream media to cover such engagement. Okay, and anybody raises their virtual hands, this is the time for you to make your voice heard if you would like to. I can't see anyone yet. Steve, please. Can you unmute Steve Hassanel so Steve can talk? Yeah, we can hear you.
On the question of the suppression, the university suppressing the freedom of speech or cancelling speech, which has been, over the last decade, a growing concern, even in the UK, but especially in your day at Haifa, from what I understand, Ilan, has become a matter of safety versus rights of the university to be a critic and conscience of society. So I'm wondering what the situation is in Leeds and other encampments with university administrations taking a position of having to protect safety of students. The whole definition of safety of students is obviously the real concern. How do you define that, and does it trump other considerations of having full freedom of expression? Anyone can say what they want and invite who they want onto campus to speak. So I guess just to make it into a question, how much do you think the campus movement in the last 6 months, in particular, let's say 8 months, is raising those questions, and how have they been answered in the UK and around the world? Are they finding in favor of students' right to raise questions, and professors for that matter? Because one or two well-advertised concerns, even in the UK, people suddenly find themselves in a position where they've got to defend their right to speak out.
Absolutely. And we also have, thank you, Steve. We also have a question from Professor Junaid Ahmad. Thanks to both Arij and Damien. I wanted to ask if there is optimism for the re-emergence of high levels of Palestine student solidarity activism after the summer holiday. In the US, students will now have to confront universities which have made it very clear what the consequence will be for university students engaged in activism on this issue. We are somewhat uncertain as to whether the student movement in the US will continue as strongly. Okay, and I think we can now go to Arij. Whatever you can take out of the question, please, Arij. And then we'll go to Damien, and I will conclude, because at least Dr. Chandra's question, I think I could also add something to this important question. Yeah, so Arij, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ilan, and thanks a lot for the questions. I think for the first question from Leila and from Professor Junaid Ahmed, I think there is a lot of optimism moving forward. I think the encampment itself movement has really given a kind of energy that the students want to move forward. Yes, we were disappointed with the engagement of the university. We're disappointed with a lot of the outcomes of these encampment itself. However, I think the encampment has been a possibility to build different coalitions, and at least the conversation that I have been talking about, that we'll take a break in the summer. We'll take also the summer as an opportunity to reflect on what we have done so far, what has gone well, what has not gone well, and how can we rebuild and come back stronger in September. In the UK level, actually, there's also a conversation about having a national conference around bringing all kind of encampment, but also student movements, because there are some other universities in the UK who did not put encampments on their campuses, but they actually have been very active in protesting in the universities. So there is a conversation to bring the students together and try to kind of strategize together, visioning what the future would look like. We would hope that the genocide would end, but I don't think that will be a stop on this movement. I think it will keep going, it will keep growing. I think also the fact that the different bodies within these universities, within these encampments, these social issues did not go away. They're still very present on our campuses. So I think they will continue, possibly with encampments. Now, are the university willing to compromise and lose their degrees? Some students are, because they are fighting for a greater cause. I don't know how things are in the United States. I think the repression of the United States is much, much bigger than the UK. The UK had opted out for a different approach, kind of let the encampments happen. And then after 2-3 months, they start saying, okay, guys, we give you your space. Now it's time to move on. But it's time to move on because there are no students on campuses. So the encampment themselves felt the audience, which is also the students, is not there. So might as well, we'll come back in the summer after the summer with a bigger encampment. There is definitely a necessity to kind of build some sort of a representation of the students, because what I think also Damien talked about is there is a weak student union body, whether it was on campus, but also the national student body, which has totally been absent. So it might be through the conference of the UK, we can build a much bigger also movement to also build coalitions with the across the Atlantic. But I think coming back to Layla's point, yes, I think it is absolutely fundamental that we can link and build with student movement in the Global South. It hasn't been the case, and I think that is a missing opportunity where I think maybe we should be thinking of that. How do we strengthen our relationship with the Global South universities? But I do definitely think that the Global South has different also challenges that they would advocate, and Palestine would be part of it. Might not be at the lead of it, but it would definitely be part of it. Now, on the questions that I was raised about the safety of the student, about whether we were challenging the right to speak. In the case of our university, the administration have used so many different languages to say, oh, for example, your protests are unauthorized, your encampment unauthorized, your protest cannot take a place. But we know within the UK system, the right to assembly and to protest is guaranteed by law. So we made sure that we always kind of remind the university that is our right, but we had to push back. It's not given, it's not guaranteed. You have to remind them. You have also to tell them that you are who is preaching the law by telling us that we have no authorization for protest. We also make it very difficult for the university to punish or censor us, because we also put the safety of not only our students as activists, but also the students of the whole campuses, because we're not here to disrupt the student life. We're here to kind of agitate around the university's complicity. So most of our activism is directed against the university administration. We always aim to have the students as our allies. The student is part of our extended community. So we try to remind them of that. We also try to engage with the university by keeping the dialogue always open and reminding them of what is the terms of engagement, although it's been difficult and challenging, but we have tried in so many different ways to do that. So far, I can say that the university are always in the difficult position to kind of really find a new different pretext for why they want to crack on our protest or action. On the questions from Professor Chadar, which is I actually find it difficult, whether, how can we see there are voices from within Israel? And I'm sure Ilan will speak more eloquently to this. But, what happened what happened to the peace camp in Israel is Oslo came with a big blow. No, it actually dismissed the whole, what used to be the left in Israel. But also it kind of gave a blow to the left in Palestine. But in the case of the community in Israel, who were very progressive and championing a lot of peace conversation, they didn't know how to navigate what was going on during the Oslo process. Palestinians themselves, they couldn't also build on kind of nurturing this kind of relationship with the peace camp in Israel. And in the meantime, what was happening in the Israeli society, a lot of radicalization, a lot of right-wing kind of rhetoric, policies from 1996 till today. I mean, 1996 brought Netanyahu, and today we still have Netanyahu. And he's every year after year, he's more with a kind of radical, dehumanized Palestinian, kind of using all sorts of language, but also policies to delegitimize the existence of Palestinian. At the same time, the state of Israel as itself, using different institutions, have kind of put different tools to eliminate Palestinian image as a partner, but also as a legitimate person who has a right to exist and right to resist and right to live in this country. So what we see in the Israeli community is a very clear radicalization, brainwashing processes that led to the anonymous kind of support for the genocide. And then when you have any Israelis who would speak against that, they will be intimidated, they will be threatened, they will be, find it difficult for them to kind of survive. But I think what also another thing that we've seen, what used to be called the left Israelis or the left Zionists, they started when October 7 happened, they started thinking, oh, we couldn't expect that from Palestinian. That is something that is not allowed from Palestinians. But what did you expect from Palestinian after 76 years of settler colonialism, elimination, kind of dehumanization, persecution, stealing their land, putting them in prison, kind of counting the calories that they need to eat? You expected them to stay just calm and quiet. You didn't expect them to revolt. And that just talks about also the kind of left, not all everyone, but a big majority of the left Israelis that were more left Zionists, and then they could not really liberate their own thinking from that kind of the Palestinians are less, or the Palestinians are, they're not there to liberate themselves, but we as left Israelis will liberate them by our own way. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arij. Damien, if you could, in 10 minutes, do this, that would be great. It leaves me 5 minutes to conclude and
Okay.
be
Yeah.
committed to the time space that we promised everyone. Thank you.
So first I want to say, yeah, I'll talk about sort of optimism after summer, I suppose. I think I have mixed feelings about how we're going to progress in the summer. Like, I'm very optimistic in terms of just the movement in general on campus having much more energy than it's ever had before in a lot of ways. And also when we come back in, it's going to be like Freshers Week. There's going to be lots of new students, and especially students that haven't been I think a student that has been, for example, I don't know, doing engineering for 3 years, they have an investment and sort of an interest in that department, and are less likely to be sort of involved in what we're doing. Whereas these new students don't have that investment in the university yet. So I think it's a great opportunity to sort of have a whole host of new people involved. And I think they will bring with them energy, they will bring with them new ideas, and that I'm really hopeful for that the future is really going to be good for that. And there's not going to be like, I know when we started in Bristol, like we only started like a week or two before exams happened, so loads of people were basically busy with that. So I think there's going to be a lot more energy from new people, but also people who've been around for a while, involved a while, they're also going to have a lot more energy. So I think there's an opportunity that the camp movement can actually explode beyond what it has, the heights it's had in the last few months. And so I'm very optimistic about that. But I have mixed feelings because I have some trepidation on certain issues. And I think that this period in the summer has to be a period of sort of reflection on certain social issues, like the issues I raised earlier, in terms of sort of, I guess, people with privilege, in terms of deprogramming ourselves from sort of patriarchy and racism that's inherent in sort of our society. And I think these will cause issues in the future if they're not sort of reflected upon and resolved now. So yeah, I have mixed feelings, but I don't say I'm mostly optimistic. Secondly, in terms of global communication and national communication, I know there's like a little bit going on. There's like some signal group chats that are national. There might be some sort of national events that people are trying to plan on. I'm not super in the loop on that. In terms of actual global communications with like American universities or the global South, I don't think any of that is necessarily being attempted right now, but I think it's a really good idea if people have the capacity to be doing that. And I think although the global South and even America are in a very different situation to what we're in, I think the fact that we are all in different situations can mean we can learn a lot from each other. There was something Ray was talking about I guess, sort of the safety versus freedom aspect of universities and how they're supposed to uphold our freedom but also keep us safe. So I want to talk about a bit how the university sort of use that, I suppose, because they really, from at least in Bristol, they clearly don't actually care about either our safety or our freedom, and they can sort of use this idea of keeping us safe to try and inhibit our freedom. And we see it in sort of public communications from the university. They will always say they respect our right to protest, and that we're allowed to be there and that they're fine with it. But then if there's anything like the actually on the ground, we see students being sort of punished. You see disciplinary actions. The university aren't actually engaging with us at all. So they say we have the right to protest as long as they don't engage with the protest. And we've actually had in certain sort of disruptive actions, we've had violence from uni security, which is in other encampments has been far more extreme. Like something that instantly comes to my head is like police being involved in the Oxford encampment, loads of people being arrested. So this violence isn't just limited to the university. They can bring in the police whenever they want, really. And yeah, other things to do with safety. There seems to be at Bristol kind of campaign of fear against international students and students that are more marginalised and more at risk. And I think the university know that and play on that, especially anyone who's at risk with a visa. There have been certain cases in the past where there have been protests where a Palestinian student who lived in the West Bank was filmed and sort of identified on that film, and then they were at risk of going back to the West Bank to see their family and being sort of detained by the IDF. And when they asked the university to take down the video, the university refused to do anything about that. And that's one example of kind of lots of different things that the university will do that sort of really make it difficult for international students to feel like they can safely engage in protest. And we also had another instance where some people, just random people in the public, actually attacked the camp, and the university had a security car that was clearly seeing everything, and they just sort of sat in the car and didn't do anything. So I think it's quite clearly the role of university security isn't to keep us safe, it's to sort of inhibit our freedom as much as they can get away with. Someone had a question about sort of sympathy from faculties, and like basically how staff have played a role. And we've had really quite a mix. We've had certain staff that have been really like amazing and have been really supportive and have been really good at being some sort of communication between us and like the university, even if it's more unofficial, because the actual sort of administration refused to talk to us. And they've been sort of trying as much as they can to be involved in sort of calling rallies and like trying to build other parts of the movement beyond just the encampment. And we've had staff come in to do teach outs and collective learnings with us at the encampment. Some of us has helped like bring food and things. So there's been a lot of support. That's been great, but then there's also been a lot of staff who have been very antagonistic beyond what their role should be. For example, certain stewards of certain buildings will close the building a bit earlier when we're supposed to be able to use the toilets and like use hot water to wash up and stuff, and they won't let us in, or they will let us in, but only if we show them our IDs, so they can sort of try and find out who's actually at the encampment, because a lot of the time we try and be anonymous. So it's quite a mix there. Yeah, and one more thing. To apologize to Chandra. I've got ADHD and I find it hard to focus, and I wasn't actually really listening that well when you were saying your question. So could you repeat your question? I could attempt to answer
it. Damien, I think you answered most of the questions, and we have another 5 minutes before we have to finish. So okay. It's okay. I'm sure you'll be forgiven, and you were focused. Don't worry. That it was really, really important. So I would just like to first of all say amazing. Thank you for both Arij and Damien for taking the time on a Saturday to be with us, and thank you for everyone who was there. I would like to conclude with a few sentences and food for thought, and I also think something maybe our group a movement of liberation from Nakba might have another webinar on something different but connected. Before we started this webinar, I was talking with Arij about the ruling of the International Court of Justice on Israel, which I think is highly, highly important. I think it's even more important than the ICJ ruling on the genocide in Gaza, because that one was more censored, more tamed, and you already knew when they made the ruling on the genocide that with this ridiculous idea that they will wait for an Israeli report to see whether the allegation of genocide was correct or not. Two things are connected to what we are doing here. First of all, I don't think the ICJ would have moved in a direction that confronts the political elites in the global north directly, with the language that they're using, with the analysis that they are providing, with the conclusion that they are reaching, without movement like the encampments. And I think it should give the students a lot of hope that there are already dividends for what they're doing. Of course, this is not just the encampments. The whole solidarity movement with the Palestinians in the last 20 or 30 years, this is the produce of their effort. The ICJ would not have used this language, would not have responded to demands had they not been convinced that there is a gap between the civil society and the governments. And they're finally, at least in language, because they don't have the power of sanctions, at least in language, they're taking the sides of the societies and not that of the government. No government in the global north would use the language that the ICJ used yesterday, unfortunately, not one of them. So that's one thing which should give us all energy and galvanize us to do the same and more in the future. There is an end result. Yes, it does not yet impact, as Arit said, the genocide on the ground. So we will look at what else we can do, but it has strategically, it is producing something very, very important. And I would say that in this respect, it's good to notice not only the ICJ analysis of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank, which by itself is important, totally brushing aside the word occupation, if you notice. It's not anymore a military occupation. And it will, I'm optimistic. I think this kind of language, we will see eventually, I think, spilling over to academia, to journalism and so on, because it's so logic after 57 years, not to say this is just a military occupation. So let's go to the international law books and see how an occupier should behave, which were books which were meant for situation where there's a military occupation for 2 or 3 years, not for 57 years. This is apartheid. This is a discrimination. This is oppression, as the ICJ so clearly said. So I think that's important. But I think even more important, and I don't think people yet realize it, it will take time, is the ruling of the ICJ that the Gaza Strip is still an occupied territory. In fact, they said something even more important. They said, organically, the Gaza Strip is connected to the West Bank, which means Israel, after the withdrawal of the settlers, is still the occupying force in the Gaza Strip. Now, if it is an occupation, according to the ICJ, it sheds a different light on the actions of the Hamas. This is not a neighboring state using, if you want, terror or military action towards another neighboring state. This is a force under occupation doing what it does. This is highly important. I'm not even sure whether the ICJ itself realized how profound is particularly this part to the current realities. I think, by the way, I think absolutely they're right, and a lot of international jurists before have said it. The Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the withdrawal from what they call the disengagement in 2006 did not end the occupation of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is still an occupied part of Palestine, like the West Bank. And I think the next stage is, and this is my hope, less my prediction, but I can see it already in the reports of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, that there will be also a different framing of the Israeli presence in the areas before 67. The whole presence of the settler colonial project in historical Palestine, from the river to the sea, not just in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, in terms of legality and international law. So I would finish by saying that despite all the problems, and Damien and Reed so brilliantly told us about the difficulties encampments face in the UK. Probably this is even worse in some parts of the United States, might be even worse in the United States after the election in November 2024 of Donald Trump or Biden. Unfortunately, that doesn't matter much in terms of what the American administration will do. But finally, I want to say that universities are both companies and management. It's already a kind of neo-capitalist, unfortunately, businesses that's a big transformation we have in the world of higher education. But the universities are still also communities. And the members who still feel that the university is a community are the faculty that I think totally identify with the students, are there with the students. And I think that also next year, Damien said rightly, there's a fresh kind of energy that might come from new students. I do think that also new faculty members would do this as well. Everybody there is taking a risk. As Damien said, it depends on your socioeconomic background, whether you are native or an immigrant. All these things are definitely can make people more, and Arich talked about gender and whiteness and so on. I mean, there are more people who are more vulnerable than others. Academics without tenure are more vulnerable than academics without it. But I do think we're going to build, I hope we're trying to build also a coalition of professors who have solid positions in the university to take a more active part because they have less to lose. They have a position of power and they should use it even more to make sure that the campuses and the universities would play even a more important role in the solidarity with the Palestinians, and particularly those in Gaza. So thank you so much again, Arij and Damien, for your time. Thank you, Hassanel, for organizing it. We don't see you, but we thank you without seeing you. Thank you everyone for being there. Do follow us in the MLN, the Movement for Liberation from Nakba website. We are definitely going to continue to do webinars and seminars directed mainly for the Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, but also, of course, to the world at large. And we hope to disseminate knowledge, open up important questions, and widen and expand the solidarity movement of Palestine to places where it's still weak and not powerful enough, because we need a global movement to change the reality. Thank you so much and hope to see you soon, all of you. Thank you.